September 20th, 1944, 06:43 hours, Oosterbeek. The SS patrol stepped into the street and stopped moving. A corporal from the 1st British Airborne Division had been in the same position since before first light. He was lying on the upper floor of a wrecked brick villa, 12 feet back from the window frame. The room behind him smelled of plaster dust, and something burned. His Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark 1T was rested on a folded canvas bag, the No. 32 scope already set. He had been watching the same stretch of Utrechtseweg since 0510, nearly 400 yards of straight road running east to west. He had written the distances on a scrap of paper the night before and taped it to the stock. A collapsed garden wall sat at 290 yards, a road junction at 380. The base of a lamp post, still standing for no reason, at 215. Nothing had moved for 2 hours. Then the patrol appeared. 3 days earlier, on September 17th, Operation Market Garden had launched across the Netherlands. It was the largest single airborne operation ever attempted. Over 35,000 Allied paratroopers dropped in one afternoon across 3 main objectives. The southernmost was Eindhoven, assigned to the American 101st Airborne. The middle was Nijmegen, assigned to the 82nd Airborne. The northernmost objective, the road bridge over the Lower Rhine at Arnhem, was assigned to the British 1st Airborne Division and the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade. Their job was to seize the bridge and hold it for 48 hours until ex-Pevham Corps, driving north from Belgium, could link up and cross. The plan required speed. What it got instead was geography and bad intelligence. The division landed at Renkum Heath and Ginkel Heath, 8 miles west of Arnhem. That distance was already a problem. Making it worse, Allied photo reconnaissance had failed to identify what was sitting in the woods around Arnhem. 2 SS Panzer divisions were resting and refitting in the area, following the savage fighting in Normandy. The 9th SS Hohenstaufen and the 10th SS Frundsberg were both under strength and tired, but they had experienced soldiers, armoured vehicles, and commanders who reacted fast. Within hours of the first British parachutes opening above Renkum Heath, SS battle groups were forming and moving toward the landing zones. 3 of the 4 British parachute battalions that attempted to reach the bridge were stopped and pushed back on the approach roads. Only Lieutenant Colonel John Frost's 2nd Parachute Battalion made it through, using a secondary route along the river. They reached the northern end of the Arnhem Road Bridge late on the night of September 17th, with roughly 740 men, and began to dig in. Frost's force held the north end of that bridge for 4 days against repeated SS armoured attacks, destroying vehicles, holding every approach, and refusing to break. They never received reinforcements. The rest of the division never broke through to reach them. By September 19th, the remaining British forces, approximately 3,500 men from multiple battalions, had been compressed into a defensive perimeter around the suburb of Oosterbeek, 2 miles west of the bridge. The perimeter was roughly 2,000 yards wide and 1,000 yards deep. The Rhine ran along its southern edge. SS units from the Hohenstaufen pressed from the north, east, and west. The men inside had been fighting for 2 days on whatever ammunition they had carried from England. Supply drops were landing outside the perimeter, directly into German hands. Food was nearly gone. Communications with ex-X Corps were intermittent. An ex-Tex Corps, stalled south of Nijmegen by destroyed bridges and resistance at every turn, was not coming in time. Inside that shrinking box, the British Airborne had one significant and highly trained asset: their sniper sections. Back on Utrechtseweg, the patrol had gone still in a doorway. One man leaned out, checked the street, and pulled back. Then a second man appeared and ran across the road. In a low crouch, he made it to a garden wall on the opposite side. The corporal did not fire. One man crossing did not justify giving away a concealed position. He watched. 30 seconds passed, A second man stepped out at the same point, head down, moving fast toward the same garden wall. The corporal pressed the trigger at 217 yards. The shot broke clean. The man dropped in the road and did not move. The street went silent. No third man came out. The patrol had disappeared back into whatever building it had come from. And now the SS troops on that sector had a problem that had nothing to do with bullets and everything to do with mathematics. They knew a sniper was watching that street. They did not know which window, which building, which floor. They did not know if there were 2 snipers or 1. They did not know if moving 100 yards east would put them out of the arc or deeper into it. Until they could answer those questions, the street was closed. That was the mechanism. That was the effect the British Airborne snipers had on SS operations around Oosterbeek that no casualty figure fully captures. The 1st Airborne sniper cadres had been trained at the British Army's Central School of Sniping at Bisley, with curriculum built from lessons learned in North Africa and Italy. The men selected were not simply exceptional shots. They were trained observers first. They could judge distance using the mil-dot method, read wind at range, identify cover versus concealment, and settle into a static position for extended periods without movement. The rifle they carried, the Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark 1T, was a hand-selected and precision-fitted variant of the standard infantry rifle. Each was individually tested and matched to its No. 32 telescopic sight. In ideal conditions, trained operators achieved consistent first-round hits at 600 yards. In the broken streets and walled gardens of Oosterbeek, 600-yard shots were rare. 200 yards was common. At that distance, with a prepared position, it was not a difficult shot for a trained man, which meant missing was not acceptable, and the snipers understood that every round fired was a signal to the enemy. The SS troops they were hunting were not soft targets. The Hohenstaufen had fought from the Eastern Front to Normandy. Its Panzer Grenadiers were experienced street fighters with organic fire support and armoured assets. But Oosterbeek was a different kind of fighting. It was not the open country of Normandy or the vast steppe of the Eastern Front. It was a Dutch suburb of brick houses, enclosed gardens, narrow lanes, and tree-lined streets, dense terrain that compressed infantry movement into predictable corridors and rewarded a defender who was prepared and patient. The British snipers exploited both of those things. SS unit commanders began reporting the same problem across multiple sectors by September 20th. Patrols were taking precision fire from positions that could not be identified. Officers and NCOs were disproportionately among the casualties. An SS Untersturmführer hit while directing movement near a road junction. An Oberscharführer dropped while crossing a garden. 2 radio operators engaged while repositioning a communications set. These were not random losses. A trained sniper identifies and prioritizes targets with command or communications value. Losing squad leaders consistently degrades small unit cohesion. Losing radio operators degrades coordination between elements. Both of those effects were visible in the SS advance around the perimeter. German regimental and battalion commanders responded by rerouting approaches. Streets that had produced sniper casualties were added to route cards as hazard zones. Some were bypassed entirely through gardens and back lanes. Vehicles that could have pushed openly along roads began waiting for armoured escorts, adding hours to movements that should have taken minutes. The snipers were not the only element holding the perimeter. PIAT anti-tank teams, Bren gun sections, and entrenched rifle platoons formed the backbone of the defence. But the sniper threat extended the defensive envelope outward in a way that static positions could not. It made the entire approach to the perimeter uncertain, not just the final 100 yards. There is a specific dynamic worth understanding here. When a sniper fires once and goes silent, the soldiers nearby do not know if he has moved, reloaded, or is waiting for the next man. That uncertainty does not diminish, it compounds. Every minute of silence after a shot is another minute in which the enemy cannot confirm whether the threat is still active. That is why streets stayed empty for hours after a single engagement. It was not cowardice, it was rational military calculation. The cost of being wrong was death. The cost of waiting was delay. Most commanders chose delay. Multiplied across dozens of streets and 9 consecutive days, that delay added up to something real. If you are still watching this and the story is not finished, hit subscribe. These are the accounts that get buried under the bigger narrative of Market Garden, and they deserve better than that. By September the 21st, the perimeter was shrinking under artillery and mortar pressure. German self-propelled guns probed the edges, using armour as cover for infantry moving behind them. The Oosterbeek church, the Oude Kerk, sat on the western edge of the perimeter, and SS infantry tried repeatedly to force through the road surrounding it. A documented attempt on the morning of September the 22nd to push armoured infantry along the approach road northwest of the church was disrupted in sequence. A Stu G3 assault gun led the advance with infantry following close behind, using the vehicle as a moving shield. Sniper fire hit the vehicle commander as he observed from the open hatch, forcing him inside and closing it. With the commander blind, the infantry behind the vehicle lost their point of reference and began to bunch. A Piat team fired on the vehicle at approximately 60 yards. The assault gun stopped. The infantry, now static and grouped, took Bren fire from a pre-positioned section. The attack collapsed before it reached the defensive line. The snipers had not stopped it alone, but they had removed the command element at the precise moment the attack needed it most. This pattern repeated itself throughout the perimeter's western and northern faces. The terrain channeled movement. The snipers read the terrain before the SS did and positioned accordingly. German forward observation officers, who needed exposed positions to correctly register artillery fire on British defensive points, were engaged consistently. Without accurate observation, indirect fire fell on estimated positions rather than confirmed ones. That reduced its effectiveness against the prepared underground shelters the British had built inside Oosterbeek's cellars and ground floors. The houses of Oosterbeek had by this point been physically converted into a connected defensive network. Interior partition walls were broken through at ground level using picks and entrenching tools to allow movement between buildings without stepping into open ground. Cellars connected to neighbouring basements through holes knocked in shared foundations. Upper floors provided observation positions and firing points. Snipers moved through this system after every engagement, fire from one position, relocate through interior passages, occupy a new position before German mortars could register. The timing was not guesswork. German counter-battery procedures were responsive enough that a firing position, once identified by sound, observation, or muzzle flash, drew mortar rounds within 3 to 5 minutes. The British snipers worked inside that window and were gone before the rounds arrived. At the northeastern edge of the perimeter, in the destroyed upper floors of a school building that had taken mortar damage early in the battle, a sniper from the South Staffordshire Regiment maintained a position overlooking the approach road for an extended period across September 21st and 22nd. The collapsed section of roof had created a broken shadow line across the upper floor windows, which masked his position effectively against German observation teams using binoculars from the northeast. He fired selectively. He did not engage at distances where the result was uncertain. The approach road on his arc remained effectively closed to daylight infantry movement for the duration of his time there. A German unit assessment of that sector, recovered from captured documents and translated by British intelligence, noted the approach as covered by precision fire and recommended movement only after dark or with armoured support. That is the documented impact of one man in one damaged building. The Hartenstein Hotel, serving as General Urquhart's divisional headquarters, sat within the northeastern portion of the perimeter. German intelligence had identified Oosterbeek as containing the British command element, and infiltration attempts were made against the headquarters area on the nights of the 21st and 22nd. Both were detected and broken apart before they reached the hotel building. Sniper teams maintaining observation on the garden approaches and backlanes were part of that disruption. Some engagements were at close range inside the hotel grounds, with no more than 50 yards of visibility in the dark. These were not long-range shots from prepared points. They were men with trained reflexes doing the work the situation required. By September 23rd, the perimeter measured roughly 900 yards wide. 6 days of continuous combat had reduced it from its original dimensions by more than half. Men who had been awake for 6 consecutive days were functioning on 90-minute sleep cycles against broken walls. Ammunition was being rationed at section level by the individual round in some positions. Medical supplies were functionally exhausted. Walking wounded were fighting in the line alongside the unwounded. The 1st Airborne's radio contact with 2nd Army remained unreliable, and every message from Erquart carried the same core information. The perimeter was holding, but it could not hold much longer. 33rd Corps was at Nijmegen. The road north to Arnhem was 11 miles long, running elevated above flat polderland on an embankment with no cover on either side. German anti-tank guns covering that road could engage vehicles at long range with no possibility of flanking. The 43rd Wessex Division, leading the relief push, was halted repeatedly. By September 24th, 2nd Army acknowledged internally that the 1st Airborne was not going to be reached in time. The evacuation order arrived on the evening of September 25th, Operation Berlin, a silent withdrawal south to the Rhine under cover of darkness. The men left their positions beginning at 2200 hours, in single file, boots wrapped in cloth, following white tape laid to the riverbank. German flares went up periodically, mortars fired on the crossing sites. Royal Canadian Engineers were waiting with assault boats crossing and recrossing under fire. Approximately 2,163 men made it across the Rhine that night, out of nearly 10,000 who had entered the battle 9 days earlier. The rest were dead, wounded, or taken prisoner. Some sniper teams were among those who crossed. Others did not make the river. Some were captured during the final compression of the perimeter before the breakout. Others were killed on the bank or in the water. The men who got across were not celebrating. They sat on the southern bank in the early hours of September 26th, wet and hollowed out, and said very little. When German forces entered Oosterbeek that morning, the physical record of how the British had defended the suburb was visible in detail. The broken interior walls allowing movement between houses, the prepared firing positions in upper floors, the carefully selected angles that gave observation over road junctions without exposing the firer to counter-observation. And the patterns in German movement records from the preceding 9 days, the detours, the rerouted patrol tracks, the streets marked as precision fire hazard zones, the buildings flagged in unit reports as sniper positions that had never been definitively cleared. German forces had also paid a measurable price. The 9th SS Hohenstaufen Division suffered significant losses at both Arnhem and in the fighting along the Market Garden corridor. Combined with its casualties in Normandy, the division required withdrawal from the line for the second time in 3 months and needed substantial rebuilding before it could be committed to operations again. A formation that had been considered among the better trained in the Wehrmacht's order of battle in 1944 had been ground down, fighting men who had parachuted in with light weapons, no armour, and no prospect of relief. The strategic result of Market Garden is clear in the history books. The Eindhoven-Nijmegen corridor was secured. The Waal crossing at Nijmegen was taken intact on September 20th in one of the most audacious river assaults of the war, with the 82nd Airborne crossing in canvas boats under direct fire in broad daylight. These were genuine strategic gains. But the Northern Rhine crossing at Arnhem was not achieved. The war in the West continued for another 8 months, through the winter of 1944, the Ardennes offensive in December, and into the spring campaigns of 1945. The 1st British Airborne Division was never reformed as a combat formation. Its survivors were absorbed into other units. The division itself passed into history with Arnhem. Of the nearly 10,005 men who had lifted off from airfields in the English Midlands on September 17th, approximately 1,485 were killed during the battle. More than 6,000 were taken prisoner, many of them wounded. The rest were evacuated or evaded capture through the Dutch resistance network over the following months. The snipers who came back crossed the Rhine with very little. Their rifles, some remaining ammunition, the particular kind of exhaustion that does not go away after one night of sleep. They had done what they were trained to do, in conditions far beyond what any training prepared a man for 9 days without relief or resupply. They did not change the outcome at Arnhem. The bridge was lost. The Cav Corps did not arrive. The factors that decided the battle were far above anything happening at street level in Oosterbeek. But at street level, those men had done something that showed up in German operational documents, in rerouted patrol tracks, in captured unit assessments, recommending armour before infantry on roads that should have been open. They had made 2 SS Panzer divisions slow down in a battle where every hour was the margin between survival and collapse. They had closed streets. They had removed leaders. They had created the kind of uncertainty that turns confident advances into cautious, halting movements. The 1st Airborne was given 48 hours. It held for 9 days. Snipers were one part of why, not the whole answer, but a precise, patient and documented part of it, working with rifles and prepared positions and an understanding of terrain in streets that the enemy had expected to walk through unopposed. The RedDevils held their ground to the last round and the last order. The snipers held their positions to the last possible moment and then moved through the walls of a dying perimeter and found new streets to watch. Some of those streets are still there, still straight, still brick-walled on both sides. The distances are exactly as they were. Standing on Utrechtseweg today, you can measure 215 yards to where the lamppost base used to be, and understand in a way that no account fully conveys what it meant for a man to hold that view in silence for hours in September 1944, with nothing left to fall back to and no reason to stop.